Alright, I like card games, I like FNaF, I made a Final Phrase card game. Right now, you don't need to buy or download anything, you can just play it through this website called untap.in. Here's the free explanation of how to play it and my thought process behind it. First things first, you need to build a deck. A deck is comprised of 40 cards exactly. No more, no less. You're allowed up to 3 copies of each card, so for example, you can't have more than 3 Freddy Fazbears. Alright, this is the game board. I know it looks like a lot, but let's take this like one thing at a time. Before any turns even happen, at the start of the game, you shuffle your deck and you draw 5 cards. You're allowed 1 mulligan, which is a sort of re-roll of your hand. You put those 5 cards back, you reshuffle your deck, and draw a new 5 cards. If you don't like that second hand, too bad, you're stuck with it. I don't care if it smells like child corpses. Then you and the other player decide the turn order randomly. It could be a flip of a coin, roll of a dice, whoever gets the higher number, you decide how. Alright, so now it's turn 1. Let's say you won the coin flip or whatever. You draw your 5 cards. Now, what the faz is this power stuff? This indicator on the top left is a card's play cost. See, on the board there's this giant meter. There won't be on the untapped version, but just know this is what the game board would look like if I could design a custom. The power meter starts at 0%. When you play a card, it moves spaces towards your opponent's side equal to the play cost in increments of 10%. So let's say this is turn 1 and I play Freddy Fazbear. Freddy Fazbear costs 60%, so it moves 6 spaces towards my opponent's side from 0. After that, my opponent has 10% or more, in this case 60%. As long as the counter doesn't go over to 10% or more on the other person's side, it will stay their turn. So your opponent could play a 30% card, then a 20% card, and it will still be their turn. But then if they play a 40% card, it will go to your side with 30%. And you keep playing cards until your opponent gets 10% or more. And 0% still counts as your turn, so if you had 30% and went down to 0 by playing a 30% cost card, still your turn, you can do whatever. This energy system is almost one-to-one borrowed from Digimon, probably one of my favorite energy mechanics in a trading card game. See, card playing is a little tricky for these kind of games, because it's hard to give cards weight and like feel of like, wow, I really spent a lot to get this. When cards are free, but at the same time if they have energy or some sort of cost, it can be hard to manage how do you get that cost, how do you get that resource. So you kind of get stuck in these extremes like with Yu-Gi-Oh where all spell cards are effectively free and you can just kind of throw them down. But then you have on the other side Magic where it's like all of my energy is tied to playing these cards that I have to get lucky and draw into. And that means your fundamental ability to play cards just changes every game. And while there's a lot of fun you can have with that, there are instances where you could just be screwed over by not getting enough lands or too many lands, even when you build your deck really well. But this energy system used by Digimon, and now the FNaF card game, allows cards to still have a definitive cost and have sort of a weight of like, oh, I get to do this many things, and I'm giving my opponent this chance to do more things by giving them more energy. I don't need to draw lands, I don't need to play down cards to use as energy, there just is this inherent slider that passes back and forth. It also means 2 cards, while one might do something better in theory in a vacuum, might be worse to play if choking your opponent for power is the better option. Let's say I could board wipe them with this card Connection Terminated. However, it costs 100%. So yeah, I'm getting rid of everything they have, but at the same time, I'm giving them the complete chance to rebuild every single thing from scratch. Managing this will be a key essential skill in this card game. It's also worth noting the scale of the cards is going to be very different than Digimon's if you're coming from that game, because Digimon expects you to digivolve for the most part to kind of cheat out the cost and reduce it. But I don't know if you noticed, most FNaF characters don't digivolve the stronger asymmetrical version of themselves with belts. I mean, maybe trash shafting counts as a digi-evolution. Anyway, point being, I expect you to play cards, so the cards are going to be weighted about that. Other general things with playing cards is that there is summoning sickness in this game, so a card that is played this turn cannot attack this turn. You have to wait till next turn for it to attack. It can still deactivate and use effects, but we'll get into that a bit later. It's also worth noting, if you think your only options are to play cards that would put you at a disadvantage or would give your opponent more than 30%, you can pass your turn and set your opponent's power to exactly 30%. Now, note, effects may still alter this after you pass, but that's the core idea. You're not giving them 30%, you're setting them to 30%. The other really big mechanic in this game is the map system. Each player has a map that contains a left hall, a right hall, a vent, and then behind it, 2 spaces for the office. Note, which side of the office a card is played in doesn't matter, it's just in the office. Cards can only be played in their locations on the map. For example, normal Freddy over here can only be played in the right hall. Only 1 card can occupy a space on the map at a given time. So you can't just stack 2 Freddys in the right hall, for example. Now, the locations are pretty straightforward for reading the cards. Are like, oh, Freddy goes in the right hall, Bonnie goes in the left hall, Chica goes in the right hall, so on. But there are a few special designations. If it says halls, that means it can go in either the left hall or the right hall. If a card says front, it can go in either hall or your vent. It is the front row. If it says Omni, that means it can go anywhere on the map. So congrats, you've played Freddy Fazbear in your right hall for 60%. What the hell is the rest of this card, you might wonder? Well, let's start with this bottom right corner information. This is the design and this is the type. Design is what kind of character or concept this entity is supposed to convey. So Freddy is a bear, he has the design of a bear. Bonnie has the design of a rabbit, Springtrap has the design of a rabbit. They get the rabbit design. You get the idea. Type is like what physical entity this represents, like what is its place in the world, how does it exist. So for example, the main classic group are animatronics. Springtrap and Spring Bonnie and Fredbear are all Springlock type. They represent that concept. The Phantoms and the Nightmares are illusion type. I know that's kind of debatable lore-wise, but just run with it. Now, in a vacuum, these words might not sound like they mean anything, and yes, if a card did not do anything to interact with any other card, that would be the case. However, for a lot of effects, they'll ask stuff like, do you have an animatronic in the left hall? Or do you have bears in play? Send a rabbit from your hand to do whatever effect. Those words matter for understanding how cards interact with each other. This is actually pretty common in a lot of card games. It's worth noting, for the sake of gameplay, Springlocks aren't treated as animatronics. One reason for this was gameplay balancing. It's also because if they did count as animatronic, I would probably have to write in at least on a certain amount of the cards, like Springlock counts as animatronic, because otherwise you have to look up the rules to know that would be the thing, or know FNaF lore inherently. So I think it helps people pick up the game, or people who are new to FNaF to pick up the game, as well as, like I said, gameplay balancing. Okay, now onto health. This is also ripped from another game, in this case, Inscription. Like Power, it's a pendulum that is kind of this game of tug and war where it goes back and forth. At the start of the game, health starts at 0. When a card attacks a player and deals direct damage, it applies its JP, or jump scare power, as damage to that player. So let's say I attack my opponent with Freddy. Freddy normally has 2 JP. So I deal 2 points of damage. However, if my opponent then dealt 5 damage back to me, it would go to -3 on my side. Your goal is to get your opponent down to -6 health. This is mainly to replicate the feel of FNaF, where like things are coming in and closing around you, but there's always like this chance you might be able to barely make a comeback if you use your resources right. Also, if you haven't played Inscription, I highly recommend it. It's one of my favorite games of all time. If you're a fan of card games or this card game, totally check it out. Expanding on JP, we have Combat, which is a mixture of Digimon and Magic's combat systems. Okay, so when you play a card, it's normal, it's activated, it's a happy boy. When it attacks, you flip it sideways and it becomes deactivated. In other card game terms, this is tapping for Magic, flooping in Card Wars, suspending a Digimon. This is a really common idea. A ton of effects also deactivate cards for the sake of their, like, oh, deactivate this card and you get to do this effect. The best way to understand the attack system in this game is how characters work in FNaF 1, or the traditional enter the door gameplay formula. Your opponent is your target office. When a card attacks, think of it as checking, hey, is there a door or an enemy animatronic in my way? If there's not, I can go to the office. If there's nothing there that'll stop me, then it deals direct damage to your opponent. In other words, you're attacking the space in front of you as well as your opponent's office, and if there's nothing in your way, direct damage is dealt. But uh-oh, it becomes tricky when there is something in the way. Let's say I have Freddy and my opponent has a Bonnie right in front of him. If Bonnie is activated, he can deactivate to block the attack. The targeted attack then changes to him, and now combat induces. Combat in this game is very standard simple stuff. The card with the bigger number wins the fight. The card with the lower number gets sent to the salvage, which is the graveyard, trash, whatever you want to call it in this game. Or if they have equal JP, both cards go to the salvage. However, my attack was successfully stopped. Now that attack ends there. Once again, it's your opponent's choice. They don't have to block if they don't want to, and you can only block something in the same lane. I know that probably sounds very confusing wording-wise, but just look at it and it makes sense. If your opponent let that attack slide, they can then block with any card in the office. You're always checking the office. Think of it as you're always having your animatronic sent to your opponent's side to attack their office and their jump scare and all that. Once again, since you're deactivating to block an attack, that means deactivated cards cannot block. So replaying our original scenario, let's say their opponent's Bonnie was deactivated. Our Freddy can just attack right over it and completely ignore it and go straight to the office. But in that same scenario, we also have another opportunity now that it's deactivated. As long as it's in the matching lane, deactivated cards can be targeted for attack. So going back to our example, Freddy can choose to attack Bonnie instead of attacking the opponent player. Now, there are going to be some funky interactions where, like, hey, my Bonnie protecting my office is active, but the card behind it is deactivated. That means, let's say, in once again our classic scenario here, Freddy can choose to attack the card in the office, let's say Mike, and Bonnie has the choice of blocking that attack. However, a card in the office cannot block an attack set on a front row card. This is because it's physically not in front of them. Once again, you're going through the halls to the other side, so if an office card is activated, but the card in front of it is deactivated, that card's completely vulnerable to outside attacks. Once again, this is all lane-based. You cannot just skip around lanes. Now, you might notice how I keep saying the matching row or the space in front of it. That's because in a true, actual physical scenario where we're playing the game on a real mat and all that, my right tile will be my opponent's left tile. The board will be mirrored. However, the main website I'm using to host and test this game right now, untap.in, for some reason has it not mirrored. So my right tile is my opponent's right tile, even though that physically makes no sense. So rather than just say a special scenario where you just have to know that and read the rules like that, I'm just going to say it attacks whatever's in front of it, which kind of makes it so there's two game modes, true mirrored and untaps unmirrored. Just don't worry about it. If it's in front of it, it can attack it. So you might be wondering, well, how do office cards work for combat in terms of them attacking? Well, once again, think of it as your card is attacking everything on the way to your opponent's office. In this case, if an office card attacks, the player decides which row it's attacking as if it was in. So let's say I have this card in the office, and then I can say I want to attack the left hall. Then it will check your opponent's left hall, and then their office. This gives office cards a lot of versatility for choosing when to attack and where to attack. But it also means they are always vulnerable. Every attack will end up checking the office. So if you attack with an office card, it will always be open to an attack pretty much from anywhere. That said, it also means you can block an attack from almost anywhere. Back up a little bit to reiterate, just because I know this might be where people get lost. If your opponent's card is active, they decide whether it fights or not. If your opponent's card is deactivated, you decide whether it fights or not. Active means able, and deactivated means vulnerable and open to being kicked in the shins. Make sure you match up the rows. Office kind of does everything. That is the map system at its core. But there is something a little bit beyond the map, the free area. This is an indefinite magical ghost zone where there is no limit to how many they can be there. Throw down 1 billion cards for all I care. Okay, so what's unique about the free area is that cards in it cannot attack outright. They're passive support boys, or they do something weird and gimmicky. I know this is probably going to confuse a few people. Free does not mean it costs nothing. It means it is free from the map. It is loose around the world. Then there's the final card type, customization card. These are your classic spell cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Or sorcery cards in Magic, or option cards in Digimon. Every game has these. These are kind of your generic typical effect cards. You can only play them during your turn. They do what they say they do. They cost what they say they do. They go to salvage after they're done unless they specify something otherwise. You also almost always play them in your free area, but that doesn't really matter. They just kind of fire off and go. They're pretty simple. There's not really like this complicated, then you juggle plates and throw the card at your opponent. And just to get out of the way, because I know every card game has to have these, so let me reiterate these if you're new to card games in general. At the start of your turn, you reactivate all of your cards so they become active again. Then you draw 1 card. If at the start of your turn you cannot draw a card, you deck out. You have nothing left, you lose. However, it's worth noting, for effects that make you draw when you have no cards, that doesn't kill you. It's specifically in the place of your normal 1 card per turn, you have nothing to draw. That's when you lose. And if you're worried about like, why are there different colors on these cards? What does the indicator color mean? That's just visual shorthand. That doesn't do anything mechanically. If a card costs 30% or less, it is green. If a card costs 40% to 60%, it is yellow. If a card costs 70% to 90%, it is red. If it costs 100%, it is black. That is just a way to quickly convey when you pick up a card or look at a card, oh wow, that thing costs a lot, or this has this value. Likewise, the color of the cards is, once again, just kind of visual shorthand. The kind of beige logbook normal page color, that's just kind of your generic typical cards, your normal chicas, your spring traps. The weirder, more support-heavy, like humans or free area cards have purple as their color. It just represents you're not a normal animatronic boy going out to attack people as a normal threat. And blue just means it's a customization card. Now, technically, that's it for starting the play of the game. Like, there's no other weird summoning rules or colors to manage, or digi-evolution, or... Point being, that's all you actually need to know for playing the card game. But there are a lot of more advanced rules that a lot more experienced trading card game players are going to wonder about, so I'm going to go over them now. Timing. It's a thing. It's almost inevitable in some games. I'm trying to avoid instances where it could happen, The general rule of thumb I would say for timing is effects happen via cause and effect. Take Fredbear. He is a card that gets played from your hand free if Golden Freddy on your side of the map is sent to the salvage. So let's say Golden Freddy gets Death Coin. Death Coin is like the universal strong removal card of the game, or really any effect that can just kill a card like Golden Freddy. Well, Fredbear then just gets played from your hand free instantly. Now, that's pretty straightforward, but sometimes there are cards with some weird extra things like then do this. The main card I think that can probably cause confusion like this is Mr. Chipper. Now, technically this interaction can't happen because Mr. Chipper targets animatronics with 2 JP or less, and Golden Freddy is a Springlock Spirit with 5 JP, so he fails 2 criteria of this effect, but if he did, for the sake of explaining how timing will work in this game, this is how this interaction would go. Mr. Chipper targets and then sends it to the salvage and replaces it with a token of either an auto chipper or a lumber pod. It doesn't really matter which for the sake of this discussion, but how this would work for the sake of gameplay is Golden Freddy gets sent to the salvage, Fredbear's free play effects triggers, Fredbear gets played. Since you cannot play cards over other cards that already exist, Mr. Chipper's effect fails and he cannot play an auto chipper over Fredbear, hence kind of canceling out the effect. There's sort of a rulebook PDF I've made that has all of this information I've been talking about this entire time, and it's going to be in the description and on the Discord server, and there's a current section of it that lists just weird examples of strange interactions like this. If there's weird ruling questions or soft locks or something I'm not aware of that could happen in the game, check the list of weird interactions first, and then message me in the TCG, I guess, channel on my Discord. I will look at the encounter, and I will give an answer, and if it's something weird enough or I think it will come up enough, I will put it in the weird ruling section. Now let's talk about the phrase once per turn. Once per turn is an effect that happens during your turn, unless it specifies otherwise. So let's say I have Chica. She has the most basic once per turn in the game. You heal 1. Let's say I'm at 10% and it passes over to my opponent's turn by playing Chica. I don't get to activate that effect because playing her inherently made it not my turn anymore. However, let's say I had like 60 or more percent and played her, it's still my turn, so even though she's just been played, I can activate that once per turn effect. It's also what some games would call soft once per turn. It's a whole tricky thing. If you don't understand card games, you don't really need to worry about it. Just know that this means it's per copy of the card. So let's say that original Chica I played, I activate her effect, I heal that 1, and then she gets sent to the salvage by some effect or other gimmick. And then I play another Chica and it's still my turn. Once again, it does not pass to my opponent's turn. That's important for this understanding. Then that new Chica has not used her ability yet. So that means I get to have another heal, and once again, this is bound to copies of the card, so if we change the scenario, let's say that original Chica died and gets sent to the salvage, and then I bring her back, I can't use that once per turn. That Chica used her power. In the sort of flavor of the game, that is the same Chica being brought back, and she has already used up her ability. Other effects on the cards are generally, unless they are a passive condition, also locked to your turn. So if something says like, deactivate this card to play a card from your hand, it has to be your turn to do that. However, for cards like Freddy, where it's a condition for his bonus, where he gets 1 JP at 0% power, that's both turn. If my opponent's at 0% or am I at 0%, Freddy always gets that plus JP. That is just an inherent condition that he always fills. Think of it as this. If it's an action the card performs, it has to be on your turn. If it's an inherent trait or quirk of the card, that should be, for the most part, all turns. Once again, there are going to be cards that break these rules, and for the most part, I think I did an alright job of specifying in the actual card text or making it so you can pretty much determine it just by reading it, though I am just one person, so there's probably going to be some confusion. Hopefully, though, it should be pretty clear inherently. But you know, Murphy's Law. Now note, this game is in what I will call the beta phase. It is me testing the game to make sure it works. There might be rules that are confusing and I need to adjust. There might be cards I need to rewrite or find a new way to write or explain. Everything is in a loose format. Even the card art right now is not placeholder art, but it's not something I'm super committed to. It's just what the cards look like for now. So if there's weird grammatical issues or things that just don't work properly, please let me know. I really hope I'm not swinging a bat at a hornet's nest by saying that. Anyway, let's talk about how you actually play the online version of the game right now. As the game is currently, we are using Untap.in. Untap supports a lot of card game variations. To play the FNaF TCG, you use custom CCG. You select that, then you type in the name of your deck. Do not create cube, I do not know what that is. Once you create a deck, you will be prompted with this menu. You can then search for any specific card. You can also look at the card art itself by hovering over this little icon over here in the corner. Now make sure it says FCG1. It stands for FNaF Card Game 1. FCG1 is the name of my current set right now. The current card list represents FNaF 1 through UCN. Later card sets will be FCG2, FCG3, and so on. Right now, the plan is FCG2 will represent the Security Breach / Steel Wool era, and then FCG3 will be all the books and extended canon and all that. To add a card to your deck, just double click, and it will put 4 copies of it in your deck. Alter it because you cannot have 4 copies of a card, you have 3 copies of a card at most. Ignore all of this other stuff. That's for other card games or other mechanics. We don't operate on that. Now, you can probably use the token area. For example, you can sort by tokens and put in them there, I guess, if you wanted. You could just search for them mid-game, so you don't have to really worry about it. Now, as you see here, you can restrict it to specific sets you want to look for. In this case, you could type in :set equals and then FCG1. It pulls down the list of every single card I've made. Now, you'll notice it says only 94 cards. That's why you click next page and it will show you the remaining card list. Just check the different pages. They should be organized alphabetically, so numbers first, then letters. It should be pretty straightforward to look through the card list. Once again, you can look at images to look at them yourself, compare the effects, think about what you want to do. Once you're satisfied and ready with your deck, you can press save. Now you're good to go with your deck. Make sure you select custom card game and then press new custom card game. And now you can create a lobby to play against people. Right now the game only supports 2 players, so just pick 2. You can pick friends only, game password, make friends with the account system on Untap, do whatever. Name the game something like FNaF TCG, or really any. You can also select the playstyle for like how difficult or intense the matchup you expect to be, like, hey, I've really optimized it, I really know what I'm doing. Oh, this is going to be super, super competitive. We can kind of be relaxed. Hey, this is complete jank and lunatic stuff. Or, hey, we're both beginners, just get new to the game, get used to playing Untap.in. It'll take a little bit for the game to start, don't worry about that, it'll just happen. It's their way of trying to get you to do their membership thing. You can wait here in this little lobby loadout menu, or you can just press enter game and wait in the actual game itself. Then you select your deck. I have a few to choose from. Start of the game, set these numbers down to 0. If you left click, it will go up. If you right click, it will go down. This will be used to represent power. Same thing for hell. So let's say it's turn 1 and I draw my 5 cards by clicking on the deck. I now can look at my cards and I think I'm pretty satisfied with this being a starting hand. If I wanted to mulligan, I could put these 5 cards back and shuffle, then draw a new 5. But I am satisfied with this hand, so I will keep it. At the start of the game, you would, let's say, roll a d20, and whoever gets the higher number wins. So let's say I rolled a 2, and then my opponent rolled a 19. They would go first. I will now play Backup Generator, which is a customization card that goes in my free area. This is one of the few times a customization card does not just instantly go to the discard pile or the salvage. Backup Generator just stays on the field. Now let me do my demo example at the start of the game where I play Freddy Fazbear. On Untap, there is no map layout, so you're just going to have to know what it looks like for the sake of gameplay. I'm going to say this represents being in my right hall. And then later, when I would play Ned Bear, it would go in my left hall over here. I would just know the vent is in the middle here, and the office is behind it. Freddy costs 60%, so I will go down to -6. If I had an opponent, they would adjust it to +6. But it is not. I do not have an opponent, so it's -6. Their turn would go, they would play whatever cards, and eventually, let's say they played a Ned Bear, and then they played a Mike Schmidt. Well, that's a combined 50% and 30%, so 50% would go down to 10%, and then it would go to 20% with Mike. It is now my turn with 20%. At the start of my turn, I will draw for a card, and now that a turn has passed, Freddy can attack. Summoning Sickness is over. It's the start of a new turn. Backup Generator's in play, but Backup Generator requires I put a counter on it. That brings us to this sidebar, which will do a bunch of important things. You can put a counter on basically anything. You can take a counter, put over a card, and then click or left click to adjust its counter. In this case, I am putting 1 counter. You can also pick a token from anywhere. So let's say an effect required me to use, I don't know, any token card. I will sort by tokens, and then from out of the game, I can play a token. Let's say a cupcake token. And then when it's done, I can send it to discard, which will just destroy it in this case, because I guess that's how Untap works. There are a lot of shortcut buttons for Untap.in, so let's say my Freddy died in combat or died from an effect. You can press the D key on your keyboard to send him to the discard pile. I think Untap does work on mobile, but primarily I play it on computer or desktop. To go over the rest of the sidebar here, there is a chat where you can type messages. but it also tells you what movements and cards were played where. Sadly, you do have to do this all manually, so when I take damage, I have to manually click this amount of damage I've taken. If I then dealt 2 damage with Freddy, I will then go down to 0. This is why knowing the rules is so important to the game. You can just double click a card to tap it or untap it, or in this game's flavor, activate and then deactivate. At the start of your turn, you could either untap all manually by double clicking them, or you can press this button to untap them all. You can also use the D20 slider to flip a coin, or heads or tails. You can also draw on the mat. I don't really use this, but you can. You can also say no response for, hey, that's good, I have nothing to say in response to that. Or alert response if you're like, hey, no, you're doing something wrong, or hey, I'm trying to trigger an effect, stop where you are. And you can also see a menu of all the hotkeys. There's also this voice thing that I don't use, but it's there if you want to get yelled at. Do not yell at people, please. Now in this example, I'm going to show what happens when a card does the reveal effect. So I play Adventure Freddy. Adventure Freddy states, when this card is played, reveal the top 4 cards of your deck and add 1 card with Freddy in its name or bear type to my hand, and then archive. Archive is a keyword. It just means in this context I put the remaining cards at the bottom. I can click on my deck and then I say draw 2, and then I put, in this case, 4, so I draw to play 4. Now I can look at these 4 revealed cards. Well, Endo02 and DD are not bear types, so neither of them will be searchable for this effect. But hey, Nightmare Freddy's in play, and he is bear type as well as Freddy. Either or will work. So for example, if I search Ned Bear, he has bear type, so I can add him to my hand. If I searched up a Freddy who didn't have bear type, I could add him to my hand. It just has to be one or the other criteria. In this case, for this search, I have the option of these 4 cards, and I get to add 1 to my hand. So I will add 1 Freddy. Now, going back to our hotkeys, you can put the rest on the bottom of your deck. That is archiving. You take the revealed cards, in this case you press Y to send them to the bottom of your deck. You can also click on a card and press send to main deck bottom. You can also manage games here, so finish game and play another. That will wipe the board. You can keep the existing deck, select new deck, whatever. Keep my existing deck in this context. Or if you're done and you want to leave, you can press finish game and leave, and it'll bring you back to the main menu. That should cover most of what you need to know about Untap.in. Okay, now that you hopefully know how to play the TCG, get to it, I guess. If you want people to play this, then share around this video or tell other people. Like, I normally don't ask for people to share my videos, but in this context, this is something that relies on social expression and interaction. So if this is not spread around, or people don't talk about this game or try to get other people to play the game, this is not going to really work, will it? You can't play with people who don't know how to play the game. Also, I would really recommend actually looking at the complete card list or reading through the cards, because there's 190 of these suckers, including tokens. So I'm actually more like 180. Knowing some FNaF lore will help some card interactions, like knowing Gabriel is Freddy's spirit and all that will explain, like, oh, that's why that works that way. Later sets will cover other characters and other series stuff, so like, I mentioned this a little earlier, that there will be later sets that cover later games, like FCG 1, this current set of 190 cards. That covers FNaF 1 through UCN, but FCG 2 will cover the Steel Wool era as well as FNaF AR, so Help Wanted 1, AR, Security Breach, Help Wanted 2, Ruin, all that kind of stuff. Maybe I'll even throw in some bonus stuff like Freddy in Space 2 and 3. And then there's going to be FCG 3, which will cover pretty much anything that's not a game. So this will include the movie, this might include wacky merch stuff maybe if I feel like it. It will include primarily the books, that will be a lot of FCG 3. So overall, there is kind of this roadmap I'm working on, and I do hope people like this game and have fun playing it. Hopefully I didn't overlook some extremely broken effect, and honestly, balancing might still need to be worked on. Currently, no cards are banned or limited, because I have no clue what is worth limiting or banning right now. If this becomes really big, and this video blows up a lot, maybe I'll look into maybe figuring out how to manage tournaments or online play like that in a more dedicated format. I think my dream of like the furthest this could go would be getting a fan game made where it's like a dedicated game just for playing this card game. I'm not a programmer though, so all I could do is supply the rules and the art, I guess, for that. I also wonder if maybe someday I could have something where it's like, hey, instead of just reusing the old assets of the original games, and there could be like a fan art competition where people submit their fan art for what would be the TCG renders, and they would be credited in a lot of ways that most card games have art where it's like, hey, there's the logo or like the name of the person on the side of the card or on the front of the card. I kind of wonder about maybe doing a redesign of the front cards in general entirely. Because while they work, they definitely aren't the best. They have this very rough indie feel. Maybe people like it, maybe people don't. I do want to thank JJ Robotnik on the Discord for designing the card backs. They look really good. that's just kind of my final thoughts on this. I'm planning on doing a follow-up video that just covers every card in depth of the first 190. So it'll be like, hey, this is what the Freddies do. This is what the Bonnies do. Here's some deck ideas. Here's the description of what cards do. That's what another video will be. But for now, that's everything you need to know to play this first set. Bye.